Well, hey folks, welcome to a special Get Centered. I've been saying a lot that what Get Centered is really about is the clinicians and practitioners at the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences coming together and having difficult conversations, or meaningful conversations, sometimes about difficult subjects. And today's one of those. We've really been exploring and talking about certainly um, overwhelming emotion. I think in all of our practices, we work with overwhelming emotion, overwhelming history, and certainly behavior that is rooted in some of that overwhelming emotion. And what we're seeing collectively right now are a lot of problems politically. We have issues with gender. We have confusion around how we express our sexuality. There's just obviously a very tense time, not only the physical COVID pandemic, but all of the related psychological, emotional, and spiritual issues that are showing up as a result. And if you've been paying attention to the news at all, what we're seeing a lot of is hate. And I think there was a Pew Research study that I read several years back in 2016. Hate crimes increased by a drastic amount. And so we've been paying attention to that. And I think everybody's lives in some ways touched by that. So recently, what we've been talking about is the AAAPI community, which I know many say AAPI, but Asian American and Pacific Islander communities that are experiencing and have been experiencing a great deal of judgment, hatred, racism, bigotry. From the most common report, my understanding is that exclusion, pushing folks out all the way to hate. And of course, here we're having this conversation today. And as of this morning, there were two stabbings of, I think, a woman in her 60s and a woman in her 80s that were randomly stabbed. They seem to be potentially recovering, is the information that I have.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, though, if anybody has any kind of heart, both literally and emotionally, paying attention to that hurts us all because it's really a wound for us all. So we wanted to have this conversation today to get in the muck and to talk through not only what's happening with the various different communities, with hate in general, and certainly with what we Jungians call shadow, and how shadow gets expressed both individually, interpersonally, and collectively. So I'm going to pass this over to Jia Wong, one of our fantastic, amazing clinicians, who's going to talk to us a bit about this, and then we're going to engage in just an open forum discussion to try to understand why this is the way humans tend to interact with each other, and certainly why it's happening now. At least I don't know that we're going to come to any solutions, but I think the point here is for us to have difficult conversations. So I'm glad you're all here. Jia, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And feel free for the people watching to kind of look at the links below just to kind of gain more information and insight into just statistics, more education, and just understanding, and even some of the historical context behind what is happening right now. Yeah, and just kind of like what John said, the statistics have shown, 164% increase in anti-Asian American hate crimes across 16 of the largest cities. It's been reported that, in 2021, the first quarter of 2021 compared to the same time period back in 2020, there has been definitely, you see way more cases than back in 2020, with a number of reported incidences rising from 36 to 95. And this is kind of just according to the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at CSU, or California State University in San Bernardino. Now you can kind of go on their website and check that information out. I would say, one of the most prevalent areas where people are being attacked is New York currently. They're seeing a 223% increase with the number of incidences reported to police rising from 13 to 42. Same thing in San Francisco, 140% increase from 5 to 12. And in LA and Boston, increases from 80% and 60% respectively. Um, Now, you see all these celebrities and individuals kind of coming in and really speaking up on this. I think it's just kind of a good starting point in understanding the types of discrimination that Asian Americans are experiencing, whether it be the verbal harassment, which encompasses 68.1%, and shunning, which is the 20.5%. Um, we see the deliberate avoidance of Asian Americans due to certain phrases being said where we're a virus. Um, and, the other types of forms of discrimination include the physical assault, civil rights violations, which is workplace discrimination, refusal of service, and being barred from transportation. And that still accounts for 8.5% of the total incidences. Online harassment, again, makes up 6.8% of the total incidences that we've seen. I've seen a lot of my friends who are gamers online who have been thoroughly harassed. And some of them play professionally as well. So when you have people come up on platforms like Discord or Twitch, who are streaming when they're playing games live, you see the disparities of some of my friends who have moved from Korea or China that have moved over here to play professionally on these online platforms are not feeling safe. And what we see in the national trends are, women report hate incidences 2.3 times more than men. Um, at some point, we're going to kind of pull up a graph of, the gender of respondents. You see that, again, 68% female, 29% male, trans and gender non-binary 2%, and then the 1% that prefer not to say. If we're breaking it down by age groups, in the female sector of it, 31% of females range from the age of 26 to 35. 18 to 25, age 18 to 25 makes up 16%, and then the rest are from 12 to 17. Now that's crazy to think that, girls as young as 12 to 17 are having to report these incidences, and are having to respond and fight back and provide a voice for themselves. And again, in the male sector of things, we see from age 36 to 45, it makes up 20%, with the lowest percentage being from 61 to 75. Now, I would say the numbers have since changed. As you've seen, there have been more attacks on the elderly, which makes me really kind of pissed off, because it's like, why are they attacking people who can't fight back? It's, I don't even have the words for it. And John, you brought up the case of the 66-year-old and an 85-year-old. Thank God they're in ICU and stable condition, kind of with their families and everything like that. But within the past 4 days, there have been four, again, besides those two ladies who were attacked, there were two other incidences as well. And it really seems that there has been a case almost every week of someone being attacked. I'm sure that y'all have heard the guy that got hit with a hammer as of recently. I believe this was in New York City. And he was and many of these people are just walking down the street and kind kind of going about their day. And that just kind of, you know, made me shudder a little bit, where it's like, again, you know, this guy was, you know, doing his thing, running some chores, and then all of a sudden you have these people come up and just start hitting you with a hammer, you know. It's, I don't think I have the words for that. um so I mean, y'all kind of chime in, I guess, on your views and what you've seen. And
It's a little dizzying to listen to all that, Gia. That's a
yeah.
I wonder if we can. I don't know the best way to get into this, but certainly I think one thing that comes to mind is hate, and because there's obviously an underlying issue about, you know, I think about even just parenting. You know, when we're teaching parents how to respond when a kid says "I hate you," and oftentimes that's shut down with anger, and so the child never learns how to express or understand, or that becomes a very unsafe emotion, and therefore it becomes a very unhealthy expression of that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And hate is something pretty natural, I think. So what I tell parents is, when your kid says "I hate you," you say, yeah, it's really difficult to be angry and to love somebody at the same time. And it may be difficult to think about how these people love people, but, you know, again, this gets dicey because there's obviously something that's going on in an individual who runs up to somebody randomly, enacts some violence.
Mm-hmm.
That's not about the other person. That's about the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
So I immediately go into kind of the psychological, you know, profile or background on somebody who displays that kind of violence. But I think also the thing that's so important, that I don't know if many people really get this. I don't know how often people are really having conversations that are exploring kind of what your experience is like to any other individual.
Right.
And I think certainly hearing how early you ended up experiencing this exclusion and bias, that affects how you show up in the world.
Mm-hmm. Right. Kind of like what I was talking about with Eddie, Ronnie, and you yesterday in our meeting. You know, I had to start in the 7th grade, you know, bullied, called these horrific words, harassed, and you know, the bully again, like I said, you know, 7th grade class, you know, we're made to do group work, and I hated group work because it's either, you know, one person does everything or no one does nothing. And so, you know, my friend and I were the ones kind of take that on, but we felt like it was um, not fair, right? Not fair that we had to do all the work. So, you know, when telling our group partners, hey, like, can you help? Can you help us with this work? You know, and being berated um, by them, and having them call us these slurs, you know, and then passing the note on to us, and reading the note, and it's like using the word chink, and you know, there's just a lot on there, and I remember it so vividly because in that moment I was like, how do I respond to this? So I respond to this by handing the note to the teacher. And just like I said yesterday, I used to be a hall monitor. And, you know, during lunchtime, I was walking down the halls and I could just hear my teacher just yelling at this one student who passed me the note. And at that moment, I was so proud that that teacher kind of advocated for me and responded in the way that she did. I was living in a predominantly Caucasian community, and so there was very few Asian Americans or just people of other cultures. So then, when you're a small minority group, you know, how do you speak up? How do we do the right thing? Um, and you know, since the seventh grade till now, I just have made an extra effort to just kind of reach out and educate others on Asian American history, and you know what are the things that we need to stand up for, because if it is that we are sitting by, you know, and not knowing, you know, what is right or what is wrong, if there is a gut feeling that that's not okay, and just sitting there and not really doing anything, I mean, I don't know, I think it just makes it hard for me to understand, okay, how are you processing this, how are you understanding this, do you know, how can we have this open conversation about maybe
So
what you're feeling uncomfortable with. Okay, yeah, yeah, Beaver.
sorry, I was just curious, you
Yeah.
know, being a parent, immigrant, first generation immigrant, and having two kids who go to bilingual school. You know, I was talking to the other parents why they decided to get their kids into the same school. And one of the other parents said that my kids could have dumpling for lunch, right? So I was just curious because of, to be honest, I'm not getting my kids into the bilingual school because of the language, you know, that's certainly part of the reasons, more for the culture. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, teaching kids how to react to the hate crimes at school, or maybe even, you know, not even that, maybe just the microaggression, is that the word for
Yeah.
it? But how
Yeah.
do you,
Yeah,
what is your thought, you know, as a kid?
yeah, I think that's a awesome question. I wish I was taught, you know, about this. Um, we discussed this yesterday too. Um, you know, I think it starts with the teachers, but if we want to start with the kids themselves, I want them to be curious. I want them to keep asking questions. I want them to keep pushing on things that, you know, may feel uncomfortable for them, or that they don't necessarily have all the information for. Um, you know, even in the way my clients show up. So because I work with younger kids, they're also always asking me questions about the LGBTQ community, about the hate crimes, even, and it brings me it makes me kind of like, whoa, that's freaking awesome that they're wanting to learn more and more and more. Um, and on the side of the education piece with teachers, I'm hoping that school systems will start integrating not only the historical context of history with all these different cultures, but also creating a more of an awareness of how to be how to be safe, you know, how to report these crimes. Because just like if you see anyone get hurt, or if there's a car accident or anything else, we call 911. We call them because we want to make sure that the other people that we're seeing either get attacked or get hurt, even by a car accident or whatever it may be, are safe. So especially, and I'm hoping that that information can also be delivered to parents as well. No, I can't push onto them, onto parents specifically, or anyone just in general. Hey, you need to change. you know, I think it's just that it's that learning process, and it's that growth, and you know, maybe 1% or 2% or however many percent can be imparted onto the teachers, the parents, and also the kids. And no matter how much that they consume, you know.
Thanks, Gia. And this conversation has started offline and is now here. I think has really been enlightening is the wrong word, but it's made me more conscious. Is that this isn't a problem that just crept up. Um, in learning more about the history of violence towards Asian people, this has been going on forever, or at least for our history. And, in my mind, it was, okay, Japanese internment camps, big gap of everything's okay. And now COVID-related violence towards Asians as a scapegoat. But, this has been going on in silence for a long time. And John had an interesting slip of the tongue in his intro. He said, each other's. And so can we talk about otherness? And we tend to tribalize, it's not a word, but put people into boxes because we don't know how to deal with things that are different than us. So in that context, how can we be more conscious of what's going on and how we react to those differences?
Is that a question?
Sure. But the period and a question mark.
Period and a question mark. I think you kind of framed it really well. It's learning the historical context, because I think when the Asian American movement was enacted in, I think it was like the 1960s, which is, I guess, about a half century ago. The very idea of an Asian, or people use the word Oriental race, was in itself racist. It's a figment of the white imagination. They coined the term Asian American as like a negation of the term Oriental, which, in the simplest terms, the West's political and cultural other. I'd say, Asian American community is not a fixed and this identity, Eddie, kind of like what you said, shouldn't be boxed in because of each other's standards or ideas. We should create new systems and new ideas of being. But again, the political coalition kind of back then in the 60s create these systems in which they felt that they needed to restrict marriage laws, created labor exploitation, mass incarceration from of back then, the Japanese internment camps, where they not only were they putting Japanese Americans, but also other Americans as well. So Filipino Americans, Chinese Americans. But if you see the population from back then, 1.5 million Asian Americans. Now we have well surpassed and are 18 million. And this kind of includes dozens of ethnic groups and languages. So, how do we get that message across? Well, I think really just, creating that understanding with people and opening up that container of having these uncomfortable conversations. Look, is it fun? If you like enticing, long, deep conversations, sure, it'll be fun and interesting. But if you're not that type of person, just grab as much little bits of information. Like we call them snacks, right? little tidbits from here and there. And you know, over time, it'll kind of trickle to the point where now you know more and more information. So
I can't help but,
Yeah.
I don't know, I tend to go down to like, what happens between couples? You know, when you look at, just really, really boil it down to what are some patterns that happen amongst couples? And I really like to borrow from John Gottman's Four Horsemen, in the way they describe the defensiveness and stonewalling, criticism and contempt. And I'm writing all this stuff to you down as you're talking, and I think the one thing, and I can't speak, of course, to, you know, whether it's differences in sexuality or race or gender. I mean, I'm coming from one perspective, and that's a meaningful perspective, and so is yours. And I think that yours, meaning the collective yours, you know, everyone's perspective is valid. And so I think a really good starting place is the willingness to listen to somebody. Like we see this whataboutism, you know, and it's not whataboutism like, oh gosh, you know, like, yeah, that's difficult. Let me, maybe I can share some of my experience too. We can come to know each other better. It's like an immediate defense that says, well, you do this, or you know, this happens. And it is a little like that old book, like Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. You know, when I worked with couples, it was wild because I worked with these really traumatized children, and I would do these parenting strategies and model behavior for the parents. And then I would end up working with the couple, and the couple would go, wow, you're doing the same stuff with us that you did with the kid. And it's like, yeah, because there are basic communication, identification, strategies, you know, there's stillness, there's allowing somebody to have the space to really get connected and work through whatever is going on for them. So I hope I'm not too idealistic. You know, this is I think so many people are scared about going into a conversation like this because they're really scared of messing up and making a mistake and showing their shadow. And we all should say, yeah, we're all scared about showing our shadow. We're all like steeped in a culture that has confusing identity issues related to our sexuality and our gender and our race and our, you know, kind of geographical, our status, you know, our socioeconomic status. And there are certain identity issues that come up in all those various measures. And we just don't really listen. We just continue to come from our own kind of narcissistic position or egocentric position. You know, egocentrism is really funny. Like the way you define that is if you have a child that's in an egocentric stage of existence, what they'll do is they'll show you a piece of artwork. So they're looking at their artwork and they'll say, see this? Do you like this painting? And you're like, I can't see it. But they imagine you see the world through their eyes. That's egocentrism. And so we do that when we're older, when we imagine, it's a cognitive distortion. When we imagine that somebody can see the world through our eyes, we project our perspective onto them rather than listen and try to figure out what their experience perceptions are like. And certainly it's difficult when they give you hard to handle information. Right? Hopefully not in a critical way, but hopefully in an honest way. And as difficult as it may sound, and it is difficult, taking a look at your own shadow is horribly uncomfortable. And so we're asking every single person in the world right now to take a look at their own individual and collective shadows. And that's going to bring up a lot of primitive defense.
I'm glad you kind of brought up the Four Horsemen, because even like going through all four of them, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what you're seeing outside in the world today. And, you know, both on a couple role, but also individually,
right,
as well. Like, crap.
Yeah, I was just thinking on the individual level. I mean, for me, you know, the people that I see in my practice aren't out there attacking people with hammers. but they're attacking themselves every day, and that's the kind of violence. And so I'm thinking, where does that come from? And I think so much of the violence, whether inner or outer, comes down to control and blame, and that we want to imagine a sense of control of things, and anything, whether it's feelings inside or relationships, anything that disturbs that, we want to blame it and we want to attack it. So yeah, when I think where these racial events and homophobia and all kinds of things of attack, I think, what is that stirring in the inside? And the only thing I can come down to is that represents a loss of control
Mhm.
somehow.
Mhm.
And again, it doesn't have anything to do with the person being attacked, that the person somehow projects onto that race or that image, oh shit, I'm not in control anymore. Of course, that's an illusion, they never were. I need to blame someone for that, and I need to get rid of it so that then I will be in control again. I mean, if we just look at the term white supremacy, I mean, what is supremacy? It's about being all powerful and all in control. So, this is a hard conversation because people, can barely deal with this internally. I mean, it is hard to look at these shadow issues. And then as a culture where this sort of racism is so built into the way the United States functions, but yet we're kind of blind to it. And we were talking a little bit yesterday, we're talking, history books,
Mhm.
don't address any of this stuff or very little of it, and so to have the conversation about what has actually happened and how we formed as a country, and then to have the self-reflective capacity to say that person isn't, I can't blame that person for my lack of control, because control is an illusion anyway, and to take responsibility for why I feel out of control.
Mhm.
It's a huge task, but it's also why I think why in this group, why we do what we do, is because working on the individual level of someone really, really changing. To me, I mean, some people like to work on the macro level and get into politics and get into that kind of thing. But for us, it's like, if we can affect people on an individual level and give them better tools to deal with their shit and
Mhm.
to deal with the people around them, then that's the only way I can have a little hope and positivity in the context of this really overwhelming conversation.
Mhm. Ariel, I kind of want to hear from you.
Well, I was thinking, I was just listening to Rodney and all of y'all so far, and just trying to be a witness, at least, because I think that from the shadow side of things, I'm thinking about my own inwardly. I know that I don't see myself as better, if that makes sense. Than that, it's like I recognize within me are the same component parts as the people who are doing atrocious things. And it's not that I don't have those thoughts or those, like doesn't come up in my mind some of the things that are possible for me to do. Just I don't do them. um, there's I think it's not Viktor Frankl, but I think Zalman Schachter Shlomi, who used to say, I don't think that there's a big difference between like the people who were in the uniforms and the people who were in the striped pajamas. Like, I don't think there's a whole big difference much. Each of them was in their own role and could choose whether, and then Viktor Frankl would say this, each of them was in their own role and could choose whether they wanted to be good within the parameters of the role. And I think the question that we keep asking ourselves now is, how do we change the parameters of the role such that we're not keep putting people in striped pajamas and officer attire? It's like, why do we keep that frame? I don't know why. I mean, I don't have a good answer to. But it seems to me that's part of the problem, is that we have these constructs in the first place that, you know, that lead to that confusion, that lack of control that Rodney is talking about. They're kind of like, there's these constructs that are as if we can control, but we can't really. So that the attempt itself is also like flies in the face of the reality. I don't know what to make of it, honestly. I'm kind of, this whole conversation throws me into my own kind of traumatic loop. Like, you know, half my family is, the show clapper side of my family doesn't exist because of the Holocaust, you know? So it's a little fresh historically. And I can see it, and I'm like, what do? We got to stop this now. Because I'm lucky in this iteration where, like, I'm walking down the street, well, the beard kind of gives it away now, but when I was, you know, trimmed up, I could walk down the street and nobody looked at me twice, you know. But like, if my skin color was darker, or in any way I looked outwardly different, then automatically I'm a target, you know, in some way, or some other version, like something other. And now I'm in this position where I don't think my people have been in this position in history, where like we're the whites. Kind of. It's weird. It's like, weirdly I'm white, but I'm not really. Because when they know I'm not white, then they really know I'm not white. But so now I'm like, how do I do from my position, which feels precarious already? How do I come to like be helpful? I don't really have a good answer besides keep talking about it and keep, you know, I love retweeting and repromoting your Instagram stuff and showing, you know, because it's not in my radar. So I love that in the resources down below, there's a bunch of ways to diversify your feed, because we get sent the stuff that we look for. So if you start to click in these different feeds, you follow them, you like them, you save some of their content, then those things will start to come into your own feed as well. You can curate yourself a little bit. And I love that you gave those suggestions, Gio.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, like, if y'all can definitely check that out. This just reminds me of a presentation that I did for a school recently, where, you know, parents were asking, hey, like, how do I keep my kids safe on social media? You know, what can I do? You know, where it starts is like, you know, have the time there are swimsuit models or whatever on there, or, you know, just graphic images that kids shouldn't be looking at. And it's really, again, diversifying your feed and what it looks like, and curating an environment where you are able to learn and understand. Does it mean that you have to follow like 300,000 accounts? No. But just kind of pick I would say pick 4 to 5 of your favorite accounts, and they will probably consistently post something. And really just kind of engage with that and process it and see how you're feeling with that. And if there's, again, kind of going back to Beru's question, you know, how to help kids understand, well, for ourselves too, be curious, you know, be curious with the process, have those conversations. And if you have any questions, you know, reach out to someone, you know, even probably, I would say, you know, I would say a lot of people don't live far from someone who is a different ethnicity or culture from them, you know, on your block, next door neighbor, or whoever else, you know. Take the time to initiate a conversation. And I know sometimes it might be scary, or sometimes, you know, it might be weird because of COVID and everything like that. But it's also, you know, if we want to know and understand more, I think it's worth staying 6 feet apart, having a mask, but also starting that conversation with them.
I think I'm just aware of time, so I want to be mindful. Something that comes to mind is that nobody thinks they're evil. That's not how this works. So what we have to do is start from that, well, I don't think I'm evil. Are there things that I do? I think to your point, Ariel, I really like that all of that, kind of the Viktor Frankl's reflections on this horrid experience in our collective history, where the realization of so many folks was we need to be aware of the Hitler in our own hearts. And again, like there's a guy I know, Robert J. Lifton, who studies cults, like violent cults, and his book is titled "Destroying the World to Save It," and I think that sentiment's really understandable. That there's a justification for enacting hatred or evil on another human, and the pursuit of self-reflection is one where we don't stop it out there, we stop it in here. And I think that's the inner Gandhi approach, which we all need to drink from that cup. So that's kind of one thing that I'm swirling through in our conversation, is just when it comes to gender or sexuality or status or race or whatever it is, not saying, like, I do think there's an important piece, like calling somebody a racist is on some level problematic too, because that's a criticism, and that's doing one of the four horsemen rather than helping somebody understand what's happening in their experience. But obviously when somebody's trying to enact violence, you don't give a shit about trying to help them understand your experience, because they don't give a shit. But I do think in our best of times, what we can start to do is recognize the need to listen and allow for people's genuine experience to come to the foreground, and take that as it is. Don't argue with it. That's what we teach couples in our practice. Like, don't argue with that. You can't argue with my feelings. Right? That's it. You can't argue with my history. That's it. I can listen to you. I can make space for you. I can be still. And I don't think collectively, certainly en masse, we're not good at that. And we know that people aren't. So we have to start on the individual level.
Yeah, that's what I think, coming back to what Rodney had sort of mentioned earlier, is it's like, that's what I think the great honor of this work is that by and large, we're walking side by side with people who want to do that work.
Yeah.
And showing them, different tools that we've learned from each other, from our own path and from each other's path. And I think that's what I love about this kind of group, is that we have the space to support one another in each other's, every one of us has our own kind of like place of difficulty. And when we all show up for each other in this kind of way, it's part of the healing on its own.
Mm-hmm.
The community that we are forming here, that we've been forming, that is formed here, is part of that healing. I think that we're in the same space talking about these things, and we're communicating across cultural boundaries and all kinds of boundaries. And the more we nurture those kinds of connections, I think that actually helps. Now, the question I have in my mind about that is like, well, aren't we leaving people out? But sure, but yeah. And like you said, John, there's also the proactive, we have to actually also be real with what the reality is, which is that if people are trying to harm and hurt, we have to put up fences, we have to learn to protect ourselves. There's an additional cost to that, not just mentally in terms of the planning of it, but actually of the infrastructure for that. And it's sad that we have to go in that route, but it's like, if you just keep ignoring it, it's like, old ladies are getting accosted, it's like kind of, we're getting to a level where it's ridiculous already. We have to start protecting the people who are vulnerable. It's part of our societal obligation, I think, bigger than just, our own community. That's a good, I think that's where I'm asking the question of where is our societal responsibility to care for the people who are vulnerable, you know, the elderly. It's like, it's ridiculous when it gets to that level. That's what when Gia said it earlier, she said like this, you know, elderly women walking down the street, and you're like, where's the limit, people? You know, there's got to be a limit. You're talking about like, I think about the story of in the Bible of Amalek. There's like this like mythical, the most terrible kind of people, and the reason that they're most terrible is because they attack the back of the pack. They attack the weak, the people who are like limping and old or whatever, or too young to get to walk too quickly. You know, they're not attacking the front where we're armed and dangerous. It's a kind of like it's a kind of a very lowly place to be. You know, I wonder from the shadow side, you know, if we're going to do this experiment, what's the, like, where's the point of identification in the shadow side of that, to that willing to harm somebody who is just totally like couldn't be more out of the fight. You know, I don't know if y'all have wrestled with that, but I'm curious, what do you do with that internally? Because if it exists in the world, it's kind of like saying, yeah, it exists in me too.
Right. I know that Beer's got to leave. I wonder, Beer, do you have any kind of closing reflections at all?
Well, I just want to thank you for creating the space. You know, as the acupuncturist, I feel like you guys are the experts with the mind. I'm more focusing on the body and the meridians, and I feel like I'm personally impressed and feel like I'm healed, you know, by this conversation. So thank you for doing this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for being here, Beaver. Any other thoughts, Gia? Why don't you close us out?
I guess I'll close out with a see you later, in terms of not necessarily ending this conversation, but allowing these types of conversations to continue. I'm hoping that, you know, this helps send a message to not only Asian Americans in the community, that you're not alone, that not only us as clinicians in here see you, but, you know, fellow members of the community also see you and are here for you in the capacity that we are able to be there for you. And the second part is just, you know, speak up, learn, educate, keep these conversations going. And if you see something, report it. You know, I'm not sure if that's a good ending, but, you know, I really feel like it is a see you later, and hopefully we can come back soon to really just kind of curate more spaces for this. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Okay, until next time, get centered. Bye all.
Bye.